So in this,
to get a full picture of how an entity functions, you've got to follow the money.
so when you look at your budget,
That was Jennifer Woolsey's job at SafeNest, but she says she didn't like the road she was led down as she tracked the shelter's spending.
it was through the work that I needed to do that I discovered all this stuff and all these red flags started happening. This was additional ARPA funding that was provided through Clark County.
But before sharing all of her findings, she wants you to know this.
There's a lot of people who do really good work at SafeNest. Unfortunately, they're terrified. Their voices are continually shut down by leadership. And if they do speak out, it becomes so difficult for them to work there.
Jen was the grant manager for SafeNest from October of 2024 until she resigned on January 30th of this year. She made it just 4 months, citing in her resignation letter systemic issues regarding grant compliance, fiscal procedures, and organizational management. As grant manager, Jen worked in the finance department and was responsible for helping to identify, secure, and oversee the organization's grant funding and compliance. After her first 45 days on the job, Jen emailed this progress report to SafeNest leadership.
I started recognizing some deficiencies and some conflicts.
Starting with a grant funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development that's designed to help prevent homelessness.
Through the federal government to actually provide rental assistance and actual case management support.
Something that SafeNest CEO Liz Ortenberger told me in September is a big need.
One of the biggest requests that we have is for housing, non-shelter housing, apartment housing.
Despite clients' need for housing help, Jen found SafeNest's failure to follow grant guidelines caused them to leave nearly $40,000 in housing money unspent. Writing, "This underspending not only represents missed opportunities to support survivors, but also risks future HUD funding."
And so that's money that's lost in this community to help those who are experiencing homelessness because of domestic violence.
SafeNest declined multiple interview requests for this story, but said in a statement that it has a range of viable options available to meet the grant requirements. The statement did not say what those options are. In November, Hour 13 investigation detailed concerns from multiple SafeNest clients about not receiving help with housing, including Lauren.
I was given a 48-hour exit notice without any transitional housing.
And Taylora, who in this July text exchange with her SafeNest advocate writes of being discharged 11 days before she could access her new apartment and start her new job. Facing homelessness in the oppressive summer heat, Taylora wrote, "I am devastated to become a statistic. I don't even own a tent." I asked about Taylora's case in my September interview with Ortenberger.
And she ended up in the tunnels. Why are clients being sent out of the home onto the streets? So it's absolutely never our intention to exit people to homelessness. And as you know, as everybody does, housing is at a bottleneck.
If that was part of the reason they weren't getting individuals housed, it was a very small percentage of the reason.
Jen says it ultimately came down to grant compliance, as she detailed in her progress report. And in trying to ensure SafeNest followed HUD guidelines,
I did everything that I thought I could possibly do to try to support them in doing better.
Jen's progress report to SafeNest leadership also addresses the Giving Machine, a 2023 holiday donation program.
There was several different categories that were set aside for the Giving Machine, one of them being shoes.
In an email to 13 Investigates for a story we aired in November, SafeNest Chief Marketing and Communications Officer Linda Bridges said SafeNest received a financial donation from a holiday giving program, which was used to pay for waterproof shoes provided to kids and youth in our Camp Hope summer program in 2024. Camp Hope hosted about 100 children that year at Imperial Beach in San Diego.
Did any of the kids at Camp Hope get shoes of any kind?
Not that I can see in any of the records.
So when they told me that they used the funding from the Holiday Giving Program to purchase shoes for Camp Hope, was that true?
No, It was not true.
Was there another holiday giving program?
Not that I could locate.
These receipts show the only waterproof shoe purchases were in August, about 2 months after Camp Hope took place. Jen says the giving machine money did pay for those, as well as other shoes SafeNest bought for its annual back-to-school party.
The program that they bought the shoes for, that we were reporting was just as important, so why wouldn't you just come back and say, we made a mistake, it happens, and we're going to do better. I don't really understand why their unwillingness just to be upfront.
She had those same concerns when it came to state agency oversight. At least 2 government entities who give SafeNest grant money initiated audits after our investigation began airing.
The audits that took place since our investigation went public, are the auditors getting a full picture of what's going on?
I know that the one that I was involved with, it was very stressful because of the fact that they were asking questions that I absolutely knew that we were not being forthright.
The audit she's referring to was conducted by the Attorney General's office.
So fair to say that the auditors may not have the information they need to conduct a thorough evaluation?
Absolutely.
13 Investigates submitted a public records request to the AG for the audit findings. The AG's office said it needs until mid-July to respond. We also learned that this year, the Division of Child and Family Services has done an in-person site visit, follow-up audit, and investigated a complaint filed by a shelter resident. DCFS shared with me this letter they sent SafeNest on April 21st. State investigators found demonstrable shortcomings in how the shelter documents, addresses, and follows up on resident concerns, highlighting a need for clearer protocols, more rigorous documentation, and improved staff training to provide a safer, more transparent environment for residents. As a result, DCFS told me SafeNest plans to give clients more ways to voice grievances in person and online, including a digital kiosk in the common area for clients to use by May that will generate data toward evaluation and overall program improvement. DCFS says it also began working with SafeNest this spring to review financial processes and documentation, including meeting with staff members of the finance department as a requirement of SafeNest receiving grant funding. Referencing financial audits through June of 2024, SafeNest told us that they are in full audit compliance, but we were unable to get more details or ask them about the state agency grant audits because they've declined our repeated interview requests. We also asked about all the concerns Jen detailed in her progress report and resignation letter, but they did not answer. They did send a statement saying SafeNest stands behind our 48-year history of providing life-saving support to survivors of domestic and sexual violence. Our meticulous financial stewardship has earned us a platinum seal of transparency from Candid, reflecting our deep accountability to those we serve and those who support our mission. As our investigation continues, we take a deep dive into SafeNest's credit card spending. Former employee turned whistleblower is speaking out about SafeNest as she calls for greater transparency and reform within the organization. One of her concerns is that some staffers are spending the nonprofit's money on themselves, which leaves less for survivors. And she has the receipts to prove it.
We're seeing those actual receipts.
Jennifer Woolsey worked as the grant manager in SafeNest's finance department from October 2024 through January of 25. A short time, but long enough, she says, to learn the difference between SafeNest's image and the reality she saw on the inside.
Starkly very different and very disappointing.
She resigned after determining SafeNest was not an organization she could work for.
These are literally Excel sheets for all your credit card transactions.
The shelter's funding comes from government grants, fundraisers, and private donations. Much needed money to support survivors of domestic violence, but Jen found some was spent on employees.
We have staff members who are being able to purchase food at restaurants, but we're not being able to make sure that we provide the shelter with enough food.
A concern we're not hearing for the first time.
This is day 3. They've been starving us. We ain't had no food. They usually fill up the refrigerators We ain't had no food, no eggs, no juice, no nothing.
That cell phone video was taken in April 2024 by SafeNest client Natasha.
I feel like it's Hunger Games there. You have to basically fight to survive in there. It's horrible.
When state inspectors went to SafeNest on October 30th to check up on concerns shared by the women in our stories, they found some food present, but not a great deal. The director of residential services and 2 other clients mentioned when the food is delivered, clients take the food from the kitchen and hoard it in their rooms at times. SafeNest declined our multiple interview requests. They said in a statement that clients may bring their own food into the shelter, but the organization also purchases food directly from U.S. Foods, and the refrigerators and freezers with shared meals are open and restocked regularly.
The resources that we have and that we're receiving still doesn't meet the level of need out there. I think we should be more mindful on how we're spending our money.
Credit card records Jen provided show SafeNest staffers repeatedly spent shelter money on meals, sometimes just for one person.
Seeing a lot of Starbucks, DoorDash, anywhere between $1,000 to $2,000 a month, and it was just disturbing.
Receipts show more than $5,600 spent over 4 months, October of 24 through January of this year, at restaurants ranging from Chick-fil-A and Panera to sushi and a Japanese steakhouse.
And again, recognizing that none of that funding was being, or that food was being utilized for clients. I recognize the importance of having staff incentives and things like that. But again, this wasn't staff incentives for all staff. This was staff incentives for a single few.
Another concern Jen shared with us had to do with the Giving Machine, a 2023 holiday giving program that provided donations in part to buy Visa gift cards for SafeNest clients. When Jen tried to trace them, she had questions about how SafeNest staffers distributed them.
If they're on scene with Metro, did they provide it to a survivor there? Did they provide it to a survivor at the shelter? How was it used, and where is the tracking for this?
In her November 20th progress report emailed to SafeNest leadership, she wrote $2,200 in Visa gift cards was untracked, creating compliance risks and challenges in verifying expenditures.
Angela Reyes, who is the chief program officer, it was her credit card that was used to purchase these Visa cards, and then the survivor was actually supposed to sign off on a sheet that they received it, and those sheets were supposed to be held at in the finance office. Those gift cards were supposed to be stored in the finance department, and none of that was being done. So ultimately, she was purchasing them, she was holding them, she was handing them out. Hopefully she was handing them out. We just weren't tracking any of it. So there's no way for us to say to a grantor that we know for sure what happened to the gift cards.
She thought, as she wrote in this email, that finding problems and suggesting fixes would help educate SafeNest leaders.
With, again, the impression that if they knew better, they would do better. But what I continually found was that they did know better, they just didn't care.
Jen says she continued to focus on SafeNest's bottom line, looking closely at salaries. The nonprofit's most recent IRS Form 990 from 2023 shows CEO Liz Ortenberger makes close to $300,000 a year. Her salary went up from $261,000 the prior year to just under $293,000. That's a $32,000 bump, while the organization reported its total revenue was down $2 million from the prior year. Ortenberger's salary includes a $35,000 bonus. We've repeatedly asked SafeNest what Ortenberger does to earn the bonuses she gets. They have never provided an answer.
You couldn't ever get a direct response if you would directly ask that question to anyone from leadership, was that it was really based on the unrestricted funds that were brought into the agency. So unrestricted funds would be, some of your foundation private grants, funding that comes from like the donation center avenue and things like that.
As someone who's worked in the nonprofit sector for most of her career, Jen says she was surprised by what she discovered, but even more so by the pushback she got when she brought issues to light.
I entered this work to support people, to support vulnerable people that had been turned down and that had been mistreated by inequitable systems. And I thought that this was an agency that was providing that. And unfortunately, what I found out was it was part of the broken system that I was trying to fight against.
Our investigation is ongoing. In my next report, we expose more spending concerns, including that SafeNest misused government grant money, an allegation we took directly to the governor.
A lot of resistance from different levels, primarily leadership.
Jennifer Woolsey says she kept getting pushback when pushing for change in her short time at SafeNest. She served as the organization's grant manager from October 2024 through January of this year. She says the final straw came when she witnessed SafeNest CEO Liz Ortenberger
asking for money for one thing and then trying to spend it on something that is not at an eligible expense.
It's what prompted her to write this resignation letter to the SafeNest Board of Directors in January, raising financial concerns for a big project which Ortenberger spoke about in this Facebook video.
In October, thanks to an incredible investment by the state of Nevada, we're opening One Safe Place.
One Safe Place aims to bring together private, nonprofit, and government agencies to service victims, children, and abusers on one centralized campus. The state gave SafeNest $9 million in federal funds to help purchase SafeNest's corporate office and 2 surrounding buildings on Meadows Lane that would make up the campus. The total building purchase price was around $13 million.
That $9 million was slotted per the contract, per the executed agreement, to go towards that property purchase.
You can see here in the budget narrative that no money is allocated for anything else.
Liz started wanting to use that money for other things, and one of it would have been the Nashville trip.
A trip that was positioned as a way to learn more about the model that One Safe Place would be based on.
It was at least 20 individuals that went to Nashville, and their airfare was paid for, transportation was paid for, their food was paid for, their lodging was paid for. She phrased it as scholarships. That's how she phrased it to community partners, because some of these community partners are government paid employees. And of course, there's rules on what they can accept.
The receipts,
so that's going to be for airfare,
began coming in shortly before Jen resigned. $5,000 for airfare, $3,000 for transportation from Nashville chauffeur, $1,300 for food, and $15,000 for hotel stays.
I knew that there was limitations on what I was able to see because things were still coming in. It would probably be fair to say at least $50,000 was spent for that trip.
This November 25th email from Ortenberger to SafeNest's bookkeeper and to the Vice President of Finance and Grants discusses the scholarships for travel expenses for employees of other nonprofits. She wrote, "A check should be mailed to the nonprofit to reimburse for the expenses. This should get billed against the state $9 million as education/training."
But that's not allowed.
No, it's not. Again, the only allowable expenses was for the property. And it stated very plainly in the contract.
There is no money set aside for salaries. There's no money set aside for fringe. No money set aside for any of these categories right here.
Travel, $0.
Travel, $0.
SafeNest's Vice President of Finance, who also resigned in January, supported that in this email.
You have to actually reach out to the grantor, which again would have been the governor's office, and you would have had to make a request to move that money around to be able to pay for travel, training, education, whatever she was going to try to slot it under, but that she didn't do that.
Shouldn't the governor's office be concerned about the fact that the money was spent on something they put in writing they weren't going to spend it on, or?
Absolutely.
We took Jen's concerns directly to Governor Joe Lombardo.
And if it involves funds that were provided by the state, which ARPA funds are, and the oversight and audit of those funds need to be conducted. I mean, that's a regular part of business, especially if a complaint comes in. It needs to be followed up on.
The governor's office now has the records for further review. In those records, they'll see that SafeNest's plan was to get more money from a Clark County block grant and use it to replace the ARPA funds they technically were not allowed to spend on travel.
Every single time money is mismanaged or misspent, the agency is at risk of not only potentially losing future opportunities for funding, but also potentially having to pay this funding back.
13 Investigates recently learned the county chose not to give SafeNest the block grant. Writing other projects took priority for funding. The county currently funds the Family Justice Center through LVMPD, which provides services to victims of domestic violence. Jen had shared her concerns with county leaders after detailing them to the SafeNest board in her January resignation letter, writing, "It's time that we start to hold leadership of SafeNest accountable. My belief is survivors seeking and receiving services from SafeNest deserve better. The talented, caring staff of SafeNest deserve better. The community who continually shows up to graciously donate to SafeNest deserve better."
Where's the oversight from the board?
What I've seen so far and thus far in just the response to everything, not just this letter, but everything that's come out, there doesn't appear to be much oversight at all. It's absolutely detrimental. The board of directors is in place for that oversight.
The board has denied all of our previous interview requests, referring us back to a November 5th statement, saying the board stands unified in its unwavering support for SafeNest's mission and the impactful work led by our CEO, Liz Ortenberger. We again asked to speak to Ortenberger and board members for this story, but through SafeNest's public relations team, they declined our repeated requests.
The board of directors were handpicked by the CEO, so they are her friends. They never really questioned anything.
The dozens of current and former employees and SafeNest clients we've spoken to over the course of our investigation all share a similar sentiment.
There are employees that work at SafeNest that are committed to this mission and that definitely care. Where the issue lies, in my opinion, and based upon everything I saw, was with the leadership.
Liz Ortenberger.
Liz took the shelter from the way it was ran before and changed it to what it is now.
I would try to remind her of what SafeNest's mission was, and that this work is about the survivors and not about her.
I think that SafeNest needs someone who's willing to lead with compassion for the survivors and have empathy.
Ortenberger does not have a background in the domestic violence space. She came to SafeNest from Girl Scouts of Southern Nevada, where she served as CEO. Numerous people with knowledge of the situation say after staffers at Girl Scouts petitioned the board to investigate Liz, the board hired an outside firm to do so. We're told that as a result, Liz was separated from Girl Scouts and board members were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. Darcy Spears, 13 Investigates.